Barbados, how is that country doing? A 2014 report says it is the wealthiest and most developed country in the Eastern Caribbean and enjoys one of the highest per capita incomes in Latin America. Is this still so? I'll be chatting with the leader of the official opposition party in Barbados, Mottley. Ms. Mottley, welcome to Brooklyn 45.
Thank you very much again, Sam. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
In view of the last 4 years of losses as reported by the Barbados Central Bank, what impact is this likely to have on the Barbados economy?
Well, the central bank's losses really have come about as a result of its printed money for government to be able to pay its bills. And that speaks to the deeper issue of the restructuring of government. Regrettably, Barbados hasn't been able to meet its monthly expenditure for now 7 or 8 years. And in the absence of restructuring, the central bank has been printing money and lending the money to government at low interest rates, which means that it's not earning, and as a result, the bank has accumulated losses. The government is going to have to recapitalize the bank, and that is a problem in and of itself. But the bigger issue is the condition of the economy and the condition of government's fiscal situation, whether the government can earn and pay its bills.
Speak a bit more about the condition of the economy.
It's not been great, regrettably. We've been having some challenging times in Barbados, but ultimately I'm confident that we have the resilience and the creativity to turn it around. It's taken much longer than the opposition would have liked to have seen, of course, and regrettably the government's fiscal consolidation strategy, which was a 19-month program from August 2013, which came to an end earlier this year, hasn't quite worked. And in 2 weeks' time, the government is going to present a new set of economic and budgetary proposals, and we await to see what they're going to do. But we do know that we are still very much into the hole, and it's going to take literally all of our efforts, not just of Barbadians in Barbados, but indeed of those in the diaspora, and that's why I continue to visit, to see how you can play your role with us at home.
Well, you said it. That's one of the reasons why you're here in New York City.
That's right.
And what do you think? Let me go back. Let me pick up on something you said earlier, before the last thing, about the role that you expect Barbadians here living in the diaspora to play. What is this I hear about the central bank issuing these savings bonds? And we know that there have been disastrous consequences in other parts of the Caribbean where this has happened. But the issuing of savings bonds, what is this likely to mean for depositors and for persons who purchase these bonds?
It's just another instrument which the government is using to be able to try and raise funds. It's offering the depositors on the face of it a higher interest rate, because what the central bank did last month was to remove the minimum deposit rate. Prior to that, the government, the central bank would have set the minimum deposit rates for commercial banks that they could pay you. Once they've removed that rate, the rates have actually dropped. So if you put your money in a bank, instead of getting the 2.5%, you might get 1% on money that you deposit. Central bank is now issuing government savings bonds that is hoping to pay 5%. But the truth is that the gap which the government faces in its financing needs will not really be met by the volume of savings bonds that they're offering. And then it's a question of whether people have confidence that they'll get back their money when they pay it. So these are all issues, but that's almost tangential to the real issues that are occurring in Barbados. And until we fix literally the restructuring of government, until we can pay our bills, and let me put it in context for you, Sam. Between 1955 and 2007, Barbados was only unable to pay its monthly bills 5 times: 1962, 1974, 1977, 1991, and 1994. Since 2008, every single year, we have been unable to pay our bills on a monthly basis. So instead of borrowing to build schools or major projects, which in the end will have people repay for it in the future, we're actually borrowing to pay salaries and to service debt. And as you know as a householder, that doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So when you have 7 years of that, what was an aberration between 1955 and 2007 has now become the standard form of behavior for the government. And that is really essentially our problem in Barbados. Its impact is to draw down on our reserves. Of course, we need foreign exchange to buy clothes, to buy food, to buy oil, to do all of these things. And it's almost like a human body. Once one part of the body starts to go wrong, the rest of the body starts to have other problems. And until we meet the fundamental issue at hand, until we stop the bleeding, you can't start the process of true recovery and transformation.
What would your party, as part of the human body, do differently if you are elected as the next government?
We've got to stop the bleeding. We've got to stop the bleeding. Right now, our debt service, government earns about 2.2 billion, is spending about 1.6 billion just in paying principal and interest. If you do that, there's not room left for wages, there's not room left for goods and services, buying catheters, buying IVs, buying spare parts. You don't have that space. So you have to stop the bleeding, which effectively probably means refinancing your debt costs. Because if you're spending 30 cents in each dollar in interest and potentially another 35 to 40 cents in each dollar in debt service, you have no fiscal space. That's what happened in Jamaica, that's what happened in Guyana.
Sure. Is this restructuring likely to happen?
Well, we don't use the word restructuring because restructuring tends to imply default. What we want to do is to refinance so that you literally lengthen out the time that you have to repay the debt without necessarily causing a haircut. So, regrettably, while there is growing consensus on the need for refinancing, the central bank and the Minister of Finance have not yet agreed, and therefore we continue to borrow more money each year, and in borrowing more money each year, you dig yourself deeper into the hole.
But didn't the IMF last year call for restructuring?
The IMF basically has said that we have to deal fundamentally with the cost of government. Government has control over one thing, not revenue, because it hopes that you will pay. But what it has control over is expenditure. It has control over what it spends. And refinancing of debt is taking control over what you spend on debt. We spend money on debt, we spend money on wages and salaries, we spend money on goods and services, we spend money on other obligations that we have internationally and locally. If we don't control what we spend, then we're going to continue to be a victim of circumstances. We've been a little lucky this year in that the sharp decline in oil prices has meant that the government has probably saved about $300 billion in reserves, which, as you know, at one point our reserves were declining at a very rapid rate. They're still declining, but the pace of the decline has slowed as a result of the sharp decline in oil prices. It's unlikely that that decline will continue, and therefore we are still very much at risk. But as I said at the beginning of the interview, I have confidence that with the right decisions, it's going to make some hard decisions, but life is about choices.
Hard decisions.
Hard decisions and hard choices. And the best way, like any family, you talk them through. These are the options, these are the consequences. What we don't agree is that you pick the low-hanging fruit. And what's the low-hanging fruit? That you send home workers who are literally at the bottom of the totem pole? Doesn't make sense because they need to support themselves. That you choose to stop paying for education for your students at university level at Cave Hill. And that's had a serious deleterious consequence of enrollment dropping from 9,000 to 5,000 in 1 year when people are incentivized to finish their degree. Now, Barbados doesn't have many assets. Our biggest asset is stability. And our stability is driven by the quality of life, the political, economic, and social stability, by people having a vested interest in the quality of life that we have in the country. And education, as you know, and ownership of land have been key to that stability for more than a century.
Having seen the paths that have been taken and the perhaps end result of those journeys for Jamaica, Guyana in particular, we have an audience clearly here in Brooklyn that's not just Barbadian. Where wouldn't you like us to go? What path wouldn't you like us to?
Well, we need to stop the bleeding. I mean, Barbados doesn't have the size of Guyana nor the size of Jamaica. We don't have a subsistence economy. In those countries, people grow their food, people can live off the land. We don't have that. In a very real sense, Barbados is almost like a city-state. So the implications for us are potentially greater if we don't get it right. Similarly, it is our stability that causes us to get the kind of premiums that we get for hotels on the West Coast, and that literally has put us in a different category in terms of the type of investment we've been able to attract over the decades. So where don't I want us to go? When economic decline is not triggered by economic issues, but starts to be triggered by social implosion, in terms of public health issues, in terms of crime, in terms of people emigrating and moving overseas so you get a brain drain, in terms of breakup of families. Governments can't easily cure social implosion. A government can't bring a family back together that is split up because they've literally gone from stress to stress as a result of no income coming in the house. Governments can't get families to return from the States or Canada easily because people having moved are not going to come back simply because there's a change of government. Governments can't make a man who has had a stroke and who now has no use of his left side capable of walking straight and being a productive citizen again. So when economic decline starts to be triggered more and more by social implosion, then we're looking almost at 10 years to a generation to bring it back. And that's what we're fighting against, because there have been too many social issues that have started to arise, largely because government doesn't have the money, and the arrears which government is building up are significant. And that's why we say you have to restructure government. It's no sense saying, I'm not paying you this month, because I still owe you. I've got to change the terms and conditions under which you operate. And the curious thing is that the people of Barbados still have some savings. We have excess liquidity in the country. So how best can we get the people of the country to take on the responsibility that government currently has, while at the same time allowing the people to make a living?
Happen?
Through national conversations as to who best can carry out certain roles in the country. Right now we have a large government that has, as a result of decades, been able to play the role for everybody. But as you know, there are some things that can be done by private citizens and create a platform for the enfranchisement, the creation of wealth among citizens. But you can't do that by keeping business as usual. And you can't do that by not having conversations with your people. And for example, we are clear in the opposition that we need to continue to fund education, because that's what will allow wealth to be created in each generation. That's what allows people to emerge from their circumstances and move to the next level. We're clear that we need to make sure that there's affordable access to health care, because the first wealth is health. Without breath, you have nothing. But there are other things, for example, landscaping and certain other aspects of government that perhaps can be best delivered by citizens who see it as a business and who have the incentive to be able to provide those services in an effective and efficient way. But it's a conversation, and you have to have that conversation. And the person, who can also help deliver, not just Barbadians living in Barbados, but Barbadians living in the diaspora and other Caribbean people. And perhaps if there's one huge regret, it is the absence of that conversation, the absence of setting a goal as to where we need to go to transform our country. What is the kind of growth we must have?
You know, I'm going to ask this question. People have been saying that you're Prime Minister. I know I'm going to be criticized for not saying our Prime Minister, but your Prime Minister is not having enough of a conversation, or is not leading enough of a conversation.
I'll answer you this by asking you one thing. What do you best remember Winston Churchill for? Most people don't remember policy. Most people remember that Churchill carried the British people through its most difficult and challenging times by talking with the people. And talking with people is critical, because when anxiety takes place, when fear grips a nation, people need to know, one, that leadership is in charge, and two, what their role is along the way. And you can only do that not by osmosis, but by speaking.
Yes. Enough said on that. I guess you have your opportunity on the political platforms.
And we're not yet in elections.
And although you're preparing, I'm sure, for elections.
Well, we're always cognizant that in our system anything can happen within 3 weeks. So.
You talked earlier about social implosion. Your police commissioner has said that crime is under control, but we hear so much about crime in the country. What do you make of that?
My experience in 25 years of public life is that it's usually best when commissioners of police and attorneys general don't speak to numbers. Crime is not something that equates easily to numbers. And in fact, in citing numbers, you ignore the impact of crime on victims and the society. What I will say is that we've seen, regrettably, increasing circumstances of some aspects of crime that don't fit well with the Barbadian landscape and cause people to be a little nervous. The numbers of people who aren't working, the opportunities for crime have increased, and we need also to see how, as a country, we can start to minimize the opportunities for crime. When I was Attorney General, we did a national strategic plan on crime. And one of the 7 key strategies was reducing opportunities for crime. Now, you reduce opportunities for crime by 2 ways. One, by the victim taking greater control over their circumstances and landscape, and me being my brother and sister's keeper by looking out. But 2, you also reduce opportunities for crime, recognizing that some people get lured to crime not because they're inherently criminal, but because they feel they have no options and that a food tomorrow is the most important thing, or feeding that baby, or whatever. And I think that there's a lot more we can do in terms of being our brothers and sisters' keeper, the charitable support, and also being on the alert to ensure that if a person is vulnerable to a particular situation, you can intervene or you can reduce those opportunities. But it's not easy.
I want to talk about what Barbadians living in the diaspora can do. But before I do that, I want to continue very quickly with just one more question about the trade unions in Barbados. There seems to be this new militancy. What is going on?
I don't know that it's a new militancy. I think what has happened is that in the first year, I think the country was in shell shock after the government laid off 3,000 workers. What has happened is that many of those workers now find themselves without an income because unemployment benefit only lasts for 6 months. Welfare votes have been cut, and people are depending on the mercy of their families or friends or their churches to keep them afloat. As a result, there has been a backlash against the trade unions for not being more vocal at the time when government first announced its fiscal consolidation strategy and the mass layoffs. And because there are other adjustments which the government is seeking to undertake in the private sector to right-size themselves in this environment, the workers have said to the unions, and the unions have recognized it, that look, we have to be more diligent in negotiating the framework within which layoffs can take place. And what are the circumstances that are fair? Do we allow people who have security of tenure in central government to give that up to move to a statutory board that doesn't give them security of tenure? In circumstances where the international examples show that a move of that type of agency into a statutory board has not worked in Canada, has not worked in the UK, and are we not just being a guinea pig and giving up our security in circumstances where the international experience has shown us otherwise? So I think you've seen the new movement in the trade unions literally saying, let's take it a little slower and let's get things right. In fairness, you also have new leadership in both of the major trades union at home. And I think that it's going to be interesting times. What has come out of this? That people matter. That you can't play with people's lives. That
So you
there's
don't
no
see
second
massive
chance.
protests or anything
No,
like that?
there will, I suspect, be protests. There will, I suspect, be more advocacy on the part of the workers because people are realizing that the first wave of losses in the private and public sector, people are still suffering. They haven't found new jobs. We're still in the economic morass. But I do believe that, as I said, with conversation and with partnership, we can make it out and that we can do better. But that requires a different approach to governance. You know, you can't educate a people and treat them as if they're uneducated. You have to sit down and talk with them.
Especially since education has been so
It's critical.
important
And people have their own perspective as to how the burden should be shared among the population. You can't ask one part of the population to share and another part to go scot-free and to live life well.
You talked about encouraging Barbadians living in the diaspora. I'm sure you mean particularly Barbadians living in New York and Barbadians living in Washington and other large cities.
Well, Canada, I was just in Toronto 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
You know?
How can you do this? How can you successfully convince them that they ought to participate in the economic recovery or the development of the country?
Well, I think there are two or three things. One of the things that technology does is to remove the concept of distance. And therefore, I could probably see you more often in New York than if you were living in Barbados in some instances because of the technology. Now, that means that we need to redefine citizenship and our obligations to the state and the state's obligations to citizens. The best way we can do that is see how Barbadians find themselves in a way to participate either through investment, through charity, through the provision of skills and mentoring. Those are some of the things that will add value. You heard me say earlier that with the threat of social implosion, more and more people are dependent on charitable efforts. Now, we need those charitable efforts. It's not our best case scenario. Our best case scenario is for Barbados to earn its way, because charitable efforts still leave you at the mercy. Having said that, being good Christians, the one thing we know is to give of ourselves and to do good works. And I think that there are many Barbadians up here who can help their families weather through these rough seas. The most important thing when you're in rough seas is not to drown. So if Barbadians in the diaspora can continue to play a supporting role to keep their families' heads above water until such time as we can get the economy going again and people can run and stand up and run like men and women, or swim strong like men and women again. Secondly, I do believe that it's a buyer's market in relation to much of our real estate at home, and therefore the opportunities for investment from persons from the diaspora, who best to invest back in Barbados but Barbadians. So there are some opportunities there for people to be able to invest. And we can keep the conversation going. That's what I hope to do this afternoon, to hear what are the aspirations of persons in the diaspora and what kind of role they see themselves ultimately investing in securities, etc.
And the third?
Which third?
You said there were three things.
Well, no, there's investment, there's charity, and skills. The third one was skills. And the skills and mentorship is critical because, as you know, many Barbadians here have been afforded opportunities that others at home have not. And therefore, let's take this, what you're doing here. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I came in here was that the foundation with which I'm associated needs to set up a public space because there are too many young Barbadians who want to get involved in film and video and the development of apps and software. And persons like yourself and others up here can come back home for limited periods of time, do training, do mentorship even when you're not here, and to help us get those types of things off the ground, because that saves us the actual money of having to pay it out for consultancy services. So investment, charity, and skills and mentorship.
Elections are...
Technically still 3 years away, Sam.
Are you rallying the troops here?
We are. I mean, we're at midterm, and the Barbados Labour Party is getting itself ready for it because, like anything else, anything can happen at any time, and therefore we have to be in a state of readiness, not to be the alternative, as I've said, to the party, but to be the answer to transformation. Barbados must be transformed. We've been operating on fumes for a couple of decades. We need now to move to the next level. And other countries have come and leapfrogged us. And the only way we're going to do it is by literally recognizing that there are certain fundamental things that have to be restructured in our economy, in our society, in the way we do business, and fundamentally in our expectations about governance. It's not only important today what we do, but it's also important how we do it, because we have an educated population who expects better of us. I still believe that the ultimate goal is for us to create global citizens anchored by the best of Barbadian and Caribbean traditions and values. So we can find work, we can participate anywhere in the world.
Your position as leader of the opposition, do you comfortably see that taking you to the next election and you're being a next Prime Minister of Barbados?
I have every confidence in the people of Barbados that the options that we will put to them for their development will be the one that will be chosen.
You all of a sudden, you're now politician.
Not a politician. I'm actually a human being that recognizes.
Or an attorney. I apologize.
Not even that.
I recognize the qualified attorney that you are.
I recognize the power of the individual, and I respect the power of the individual, and I don't take anything for granted. I mean, the polls have us comfortably out front at midterm, but I am conscious that polls are a snapshot in time, and therefore you don't rest on those laurels, but you keep working every day to convince people why you are the better choice. And I think we are the better choice. I think we have a development vision that can be replicated, not just for Barbados, but for the Caribbean. And I think that we have the team, which is also important, who can implement that team. And with me I have, as I've done every year, I've tried to bring up, we have a new Member of Parliament up here this time, Eddie Hinkson, who's the Shadow Minister of Health and the Member of Parliament for St. James North. Last year I brought others, because I think it's important that the diaspora gets to know who the team is, because the team is as important also as what we set out to do.
The Republic of Barbados.
Is there going to be a change?
I'm asking you.
I don't know. I don't read the newspaper for hearsay. Everything I've seen in the paper, regrettably, no one has spoken to me, so I can't comment on it.
But I'd like you to comment, though.
I take those...
Not on what the newspaper is saying or not saying.
I take those high constitutional matters very seriously, and I will not, therefore, seek to elevate it to a level that has not been elevated to by the government. What are the
advantages of being a republic?
There are multiple advantages in terms of completing the process of independence, but I'm being very serious, Sam. I don't believe that we should be distracted on matters that are not the serious intention of a government. If the government is serious about it and it wants things to happen, then it has a duty to speak to the other part of the government, which is the opposition. And when that is done, then I will have a full conversation with the Barbadian people in Barbados and the diaspora on it.
I look forward to welcoming you back as soon as I hear that there is something more definitive.
And I certainly would want the opportunity to come back. I've come to enjoy these conversations.
I want to thank you for being my guest on Brooklyn 45.
Thank you, Sam.
I wish you success in your engagements here with Barbadians. And mind you, I did not say with members of the Barbados Labour Party, but with Barbadians, as you're trying to encourage Barbadians to become more involved in their country, even though they're separated by sea.
Yeah, and I think you know me well enough to know that one of the things that we want to bring is a new politics. I don't believe that the tribal politics can continue to serve us well. I believe that we have an obligation to bring all Barbadians to a central place, that we unite on what unites us, that we come together on what unites us, rather than focus on what separates us as a people. And that doesn't mean you're not going to have separations or divisions, but there's a higher purpose.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Our Brooklyn 45 team would love to hear from you. Your comments about this program, any new topics that you'd like us to discuss, and any other suggestions you have. Send us an email at info@brooklyn45.com. That's info@brooklyn45.com. Or send us a Facebook message at facebook.com/Brooklyn45TV. That's facebook.com/Brooklyn45TV. Please also visit our Facebook page and like us. Brooklyn 45 is your information television program, and you are important to us. This is Brooklyn 45. Watch us next Thursday, 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. on this channel.